don't rely on tasks for teaching tools only, because they're very rigid.
That's right. Yes.
Thank you for bringing this forward. I guess one of the things that I was kind of thinking about as you were talking was this, I think it was like sort of through the 90s, this real focus on school readiness and getting kids ready for school, and this sort of focus, about sort of teaching kids ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. And I think, certainly your research, Stuart Shanker and others, really demonstrates that in fact we really can do away with learning about the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. I mean, obviously they'll come, but what we really need to be teaching kids is to be calm, to be thoughtful, to be critical thinkers, and that in fact in the programs that we're funding or supporting, those are the things, the skills that we should really sort of be trying to help children sort of get to.
We want to, yes, absolutely, and I'll actually come to that a little bit later in the talk. We want to train them in being able to focus and pay attention, be able to control their behavior a bit so they don't keep annoying people and getting in trouble. But we also, I think, want to teach them about compassion and kindness, which can also start early. And I think people can get too focused on just the cognitive, but we want the whole person. We don't want just the brain. The brainy person. Somebody else. Okay. The good news is that executive functions can be improved. There are 3 basic ways to improve functioning that requires executive functions. One is to work directly on executive functions, to work on training them, challenging them, and to keep practicing. Another is to work on reducing things that impair executive functions, like stress, lack of sleep, etc. So somebody may have poor executive functions in daily life, not because their executive functions aren't good, but because they're too sleep deprived to be able to show the executive functions they have. And a final way is to find ways of reducing the demands on executive function, circumventing the needs for them. And I'll talk about scaffolding in a little bit later. So executive functions are very effortful. It takes a lot of work to try to do them. And a lot of times, we don't have to work that hard. We can make life easier for ourselves, like writing ourselves notes, instead of trying to remember the 10 zillion things we have to make sure we do today. You don't have to do that. You can really write the note. It's not an embarrassing thing. It's fine. And there are lots of things we can do to make life easier. Like instead of putting the cookies out there where everybody can see them and have to work not to eat them, put them in an opaque container. They're there, they're available, but they're not in your face. Many different activities have been shown to improve executive functions, including computerized training, games, aerobics, traditional martial arts, yoga, mindfulness, and certain school curricula like Tools of the Mind, Mind Up, which came after I made the slide, the evidence, Montessori, and PATS. I want to talk about Tools of the Mind for a minute. Tools of the Mind was developed by Elena Batrova and Debbie Leong, and it's based on the work of Loria and Vygotsky. Key aspects of the Tools curriculum are the importance of play and hands-on learning, the critical importance of improving self-regulation, executive functions, especially self-control and being able to pay attention in young children. Now, one of the ways that they emphasize play and build self-regulation is through dramatic play. So let's say you and your friends are playing cops and robbers. You have to remember who has what role, right? Because if you guys are planning the robbery, you don't want to accidentally tell the cop. I mean, that would be terrible. You have to remember who's who. And let's say you're doing a family scenario and you're the baby. You can't all of a sudden get up and drive that enticing looking car. You have to stay in your role as baby. You have to inhibit acting out of character. And your friends who everybody's just doing this on the fly, right? So you don't know where your friends are going with this. Your friends may take that scenario in ways you never imagined. So in real time, you have to flexibly adjust to where things are going. It's working all 3 executive functions, and they're just playing. Another key aspect of tools is the conviction that cognitive development advances most when social and emotional development are also nurtured. The tools approach is individualized, so kids receive support at their own unique developmental level, and each child proceeds in his or her own rate. It's very individualized. The BC Ministry of Health and the BC Mental Health Foundation funded a pilot implementation of Tools of the Mind in 5 kindergartens in Vancouver and 4 in Surrey starting last year. Although the program, Tools of the Mind, was initially developed in the US, activities were modified for this randomized control trial to fit the Canadian context. So these 9 BC classes are the first in Canada to get this program tailored for our educational system here. The results for last year, year 1 of Tools, exceeded everybody's expectations, and expectations were already high. On objective measures of academic performance, and on kids' excitement to learn, joy in coming to school, and social emotional development, as well as reduced teacher burnout. I'll show you a couple of the graphs. But the kids would say when they were sick, they begged their parents to still let them go to school. As opposed to playing sick so they could get out of going to school. Also, the results at the end of last year were markedly better than the same teachers observed in previous years when they weren't doing tools, and markedly better than comparison teachers closely matched on many variables but not doing tools observed last year. So, for example, at the beginning of the year, about the same number of kids, same percentage of kids in tools classes and comparison classes were non-readers, okay? By the end of the year, a lot more kids in the comparison classes were still non-readers. Very few in tools classes were still non-readers. The difference is even more dramatic for writing. At the beginning of the year, most kids couldn't write, or their writing skills did not exceed being able to write their first name without copy. So at the beginning of the school year, most kids could do at most writing their first name. At the end of the school year, the percent of kids writing at least one consecutive full sentence is 64% for tools and only 23% for comparison classes. Huge difference, big difference. And this is the percent of classes where the teacher reported the presence of cliques. You get a lot more in the non-tools classes. In the tools classes, the kids are helping each other, they're working with each other, the parents report on how their kid is playing with kids he wouldn't have expected before, and how they seem to be happy playing with a lot of different kids in the class. I could go on and on with the graphs. Feedback from the school administrators and parents has been resoundingly positive. There's no teacher teaching tools who isn't ecstatic about it. There are already long waiting lists and requests a year in advance from parents for their children to get into these classrooms that are doing tools in kindergarten. Something that seems that hugely beneficial needs to reach more kids and deserves to be followed up with more rigorous study, with a larger number of classrooms. This is only 9 classrooms in each group, and followed longitudinally over time. But there are no funds for any further training or expansion of tools to other schools, and no funds for a rigorous evaluation of tools. And I think that's terrible. I think it's a disgrace. I applied to CIHR to do a rigorous study. And they said in 2007 you published a paper in Science that showed that tools was good. You've already answered this. You don't need to do any more study. So I had to write back to them all the faults, all the flaws in my science paper so they could see how we needed more study. They still didn't fund me. Contrary to a lot of influential reviews that talk about the benefits of aerobic exercise, it's not true. Exercise without a social or cognitive component, like riding a stationary bike, produces little or no cognitive benefit. You need to have a cognitive component and probably also a social component. Exercise alone appears not to be as effective in improving executive functions as exercise plus character development, traditional martial arts, and exercise plus mindfulness yoga, and other exercise that requires thought, like soccer. Lakes and Hoyt randomly assigned kids in grades kindergarten through 5, either to traditional Taekwondo or to standard phys ed. By the end of the year, the kids who had been assigned to Taekwondo showed greater gains than kids in standard phys ed on all the dimensions of executive function that they studied. This generalized to multiple contexts and was found on multiple measures. Now, traditional martial arts emphasize self-control, respect. They talk about not going in and immediately attacking your opponent, but waiting till your opponent gives you the opportunity. Wait till your opponent is slightly off balance, and now go in. So you have to inhibit your initial impulse, which is to go in there and get him. Wait until you have the opportunity to really succeed. In a study with adolescent juvenile delinquents, one group was assigned to traditional Taekwondo, and the other group was assigned to modern martial arts. Martial arts only as a competitive sport, only as a physical activity, nothing about respect, character development, or waiting before you go in and attack. Those in traditional Taekwondo showed less aggression and anxiety and improved in social ability and self-esteem. But those in modern martial arts showed more juvenile delinquency and aggressiveness and decreased self-esteem and social ability. So whether executive function gains are seen depends critically on the way an activity is done. You can name the activity the same thing, they're both called martial arts, but in one case you got positive outcomes, in the other case you got negative outcomes. Regardless of the program to improve executive functions, a few principles hold. Those with initially poorest executive functions always gain the most. So lower income kids, ADHD kids, etc. They always show the biggest gains. Now, children at risk start school with worse executive functions than more economically advantaged kids. And they fall progressively farther behind every year they're in school. So that's called the widening achievement gap, because you start out with a small difference in academics and EF, executive functions, and every year that gets wider. So small differences at the beginning can lead to bigger and bigger differences over time. Why might that be true? I think it has to do with feedback loops. Imagine you start school with not such good executive functions. So you're blurting out the answer, you're jumping out of your seat, you're having trouble completing your assignments, you're having trouble paying attention, you're bothering other kids. You are always getting scolded, and you're getting lousy grades. You think, I want out of here, right? This is a place of failure for me. I can't do it. I don't like it here. Now imagine you start school with good executive functions, and you stay in your seat, and you pay attention, and you complete your assignment, you raise your hand, and you pay attention, you don't bother the other kids, and your teacher says, I wish I had a whole class of children like you. And you think, I kind of like it here. I'm getting praise, I'm getting good grades, I don't want to be here. So you have one kid who wants in and one kid who wants out. No wonder they differ more and more every year. So I think that what you have is two feedback loops going in opposite direction. One child wants out and doesn't expect to succeed, and one child wants in and fully expects to succeed. So I think improving executive functions early, before they get in grade 1, might nip that dynamic in the bud. Thus, early executive function training might be an excellent candidate for reducing inequality, because it should improve the executive functions of the most needy children most, thus heading off gaps in achievement and health between more and less advantaged children. Executive function training appears to transfer, but the transfer is not wide. For example, computerized working memory training improves working memory, but not self-control, creativity, or flexibility. People improve on the skills they practice, and that transfers to other contexts where those same skills are needed. But people only improve on what they practice. Improvement doesn't transfer to other skills that you haven't practiced. To see widespread benefits, diverse skills must be practiced. Because of that, real-world activities, such as martial arts and certain school curricula, that train the different executive function abilities, have shown more widespread cognitive benefits than targeted computerized training. Executive functions need to be continually challenged to see improvements, not just used, but challenged. Erickson spent his whole career looking at what makes an expert in all kinds of different fields, and they found the answer was always the same. A gazillion hours of practice, and practice not doing what's easy for you, but practice always just at the limits of your comfort zone. right? What Vygotsky would call the zone of proximal development. What you can't do on your own, but you can do with the help of somebody else. Groups, I'll skip that. The importance of repeated practice. Whether executive function gains are seen depends on the amount of time spent practicing, working on the skills, pushing yourself to develop. Executive functions depend on prefrontal cortex and the other neural regions with which prefrontal cortex is interconnected. Prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain I specialize in, is overrated. To learn something new, we need prefrontal. But after something is no longer new, the people who perform best often recruit prefrontal least. Okay, here's an example from an early neuroimaging study. This was a task that requires prefrontal cortex, and some people show the activation of prefrontal bilaterally in both hemispheres of the brain. Some subjects show it more on one side, some subjects show it more on the other side. That's normal individual variation, that's fine. But 2 subjects didn't show it at all. That's Ruth Brigida and Kathy O'Craven, my colleagues, collaborators on the study. And because they were familiar with the task, prefrontal activation dropped out. So when something's new, those who recruit prefrontal most usually perform best. But when you're really good at it, you're not using prefrontal so much. We want to be able to use prefrontal whenever we're presenting